now turn to Yueh to continue the case for the proposition.
Hi, good evening, everyone. By the way, I'm very impressed by the student debates so far, so well done and well prepared. Even you. You look really surprised. I'm going to focus my section on economics, which is my subject. And I think probably the first thing that I would point out is that the reason why we should be engaging with China and its overseas impact is because the reverse is unthinkable. Nations which turn inward because they are not welcomed, they do so to the detriment of not only their country, but the rest of the world. North Korea comes to mind as an isolationist type of nation. That being said, a lukewarm welcome is a welcome nevertheless. Of course, there are problems and issues in terms of how China's external economic impact is being manifested. So right now, the EU-China summit is taking place. The European Union has worries and objections to how OBER, the One Belt, One Road policy, is not respecting environmental standards, and therefore the European Union is reluctant to throw their support behind this massive infrastructure investment project. But the way for China to improve those standards is precisely that way, through engagement, by negotiating with China to bring environmental, social, labor standards into what they do. That's how the process of improvement can start. Now, of course, I realize it's difficult. Some of you will have heard a Chinese joke or phrase that gets used sometimes. The Chinese like to say they believe in a win-win situation. But that normally means that China wins twice. So China is an economic superpower. Negotiating with China will be tough. But as I say, the important thing is engagement. And in terms of engagement and turning outward, I think probably the most important point I will make here is that the reason to look to engage with China is not because we have to look for any leadership aside from Donald Trump. That's not the most important reason. It's not because America stepped back and China stepped forward and therefore we have to. The most important reason is that the external orientation of China, as well as other nations around the world, notably India and Eastern Europe, in the early 1990s, is the reason why we are currently at a historic point where just, and is still a lot of people, 1 in 10 of the world's population lives in extreme poverty. So what happened in the early 1990s? China's open door policy took off in 1992. They became externally oriented. India's balance of payments crisis in 1991 caused the country to abandon import substitution and move towards export orientation. The end of the Berlin Wall and communism and the collapse of the Soviet Union meant that Eastern Europe rejoined the global economy for the first time. These were seismic changes. Global trade and investment sped up at that point. And 1990 is the point where the Millennium Development Goals set as the starting point to achieve the reduction of people who live in extreme poverty by 1 billion by 2015. That goal was reached 5 years early, largely due to China's impressive strides in terms of lifting the extreme poor over the $1.90 per day, adjusted for what a dollar buys in that country. And so the integration of the world economies, globalization, is largely responsible for this tremendous point that we have gotten to. And lots of people, when we talk about poverty, obviously we have to recognize it's not the end of poverty. If just because you make more than $1.90 per day means you're still poor. But I'm talking about progress that we had never seen. And looking ahead, the Sustainable Development Goals, which are the new UN targets, they project that by 2030, we are within the possibility of ending extreme poverty altogether. And the reason for this, again, is because China and East Asia and Eastern Europe are on the cusp of ending extreme poverty already. And so this integration means that we cannot turn back and look backwards. We have to look forwards and say, how can we improve this engagement, this integration of the world's most populated? Yeah, go ahead.
I don't think anyone on side opposition here is saying that we should turn back and we should turn away from China. I think on opposition we are arguing that with this increased engagement, now is the time to be critical of China and to hold them to account to ensure that the development they provide is stable and beneficial and humane. That is the point of the opposition, not isolation.
And it's a very good point. And I think that is why engaging China to improve how they do infrastructure investment is, of course, one of the key points there. But to do that, you have to engage. Now, in terms of looking at, as I say, a lot of these issues around economic growth and poverty, China has become the biggest engine of growth. I think all of you will be quite familiar with those statistics. I don't want to repeat those. What I want to leave you with in this part is really the notion that China's growth has lifted the standard of living for hundreds of millions of people in the world's most populous nation. And looking at China as the bigger engine of growth than the United States, a similar tide of growth, which is what had been discussed before, is something to bear in mind when you want to think about, do you want to see China's overseas impact expand or not? And so I think for a lot of these economic reasons, I think let me put it this way. I take the point, and well made, that economics is not everything, but it means an awful lot when you're poor. And even if you're in the left behind middle class, which a lot of people feel they are in an era of globalization, those who have not benefited as much, when you look at the politically disaffected, quite a lot of the solutions being put forward to help the squeezed middle center around improving standards of living. So no, it's not everything, but it is extremely important. And yeah, of course, go ahead. It's like a tutorial, just go on. Well made, thank you very much. So I'm running out of time, but I think that's, just getting a sense of how much I think the world has improved. And in fact, looking ahead, the UN and OECD and others expect that for the very first time in just 13 years, 2030, there will be more people in the middle class. More than half of the world will be middle class. We've never seen that before. And 2/3 of those will be in Asia. And so I suppose my final thoughts to leave you with on this is China has faults, America has faults. The way to deal with them is not to not welcome them, not engage with them, but to help shape their impact. Because in this globalized world, you have to accept that external impact is the norm, it's not the exception. So, my final few thoughts are engagement, not isolation, encouragement, not disparagement. For those reasons, I hope you'll vote for the proposition that this House welcomes China's overseas impact, even if it's lukewarm.